Recording. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Done Right webinar, hosted by Inedo with makers of Buildmaster and XBOSoft. Hopefully, I said that right, Phil. I am from Inedo, of course, and Phil is from XBOSoft. And for those of you who are new, I thought we'd give a quick introduction about ourselves and who we are. But Phil, I wanted to open up with a quick question for you. Well, first off, is it XBOSoft? Is that the appropriate? Is that the general pronunciation for folks?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and so my second question is, when did you guys come up with that logo? Because I can't help but notice now that there's just this uncanny resemblance between the Buildmaster logo and the XBOSoft logo.
I just noticed that too. Actually, that logo was developed in 2009.
Okay, so we just did this logo in last year as part of our Buildmaster 4.0, so I think we can say that you guys pre-stole the logo from us.
Okay.
So just a quick intro to who we are, and that's so I'm Alex. My background is primarily software development. I've been developing software for quite a while now, and have had just experiences in lots of different industries and healthcare, manufacturing, small teams, large teams. But my side has been largely on software dev. And in 2003, I started Inedo to be a custom application and development shop. You know, nothing all too out of the ordinary. But what happened around 2005, give or take, was we sort of shifted into consulting and best practices, and eventually, we decided to launch our own software product called Buildmaster. Now, Buildmaster focuses around this space that today is called DevOps and continuous delivery. But basically, what Buildmaster does is it's responsible for solving the problem space between source control and production. So it can do continuous integration, automation, automated delivery, some testing automation, things like that. But primarily these days, Inedo is a software product company, and we'll be talking about some of the testing and how it relates to automation. Phil, I'll shift it on over to you if you want to give a quick background on yourself.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm the CEO and founder of XBOSoft, and we were founded about 7.5 years ago. My background is mostly in the development space and in IT operations. And the last 10 years, I've been in the QA space. And our company, Galaxy, does not have a product, but focuses solely on software QA services. And that includes the consulting side and helping people to work on their QA processes, and also on execution on software testing services. We're headquartered in Santa Clara, and we have offices in Beijing as well as in Europe.
Very cool, very cool. Well, thanks for that, Phil. So the discussion today is called Testing Done Right, and I think that when a lot of us think about testing, especially with the way that all the talks and articles go, everyone really seems to be thinking about this idea of automated unit testing. That's especially I go to a lot of software conferences and a lot of agile and DevOps events, and this whole idea of automated unit testing seems to be where everyone is focusing on. If you're not familiar with automated unit testing, it's basically just code that just tests your other code. It's pretty straightforward, and it's a fundamental element of some development methodologies like test-driven development. And one of the interesting things and ideas that I see coming out of these idea of unit testing is this concept of code coverage. And the idea of code coverage is, so here's just, you can see the code on the screen here. It's very simple. It's testing just a couple of utility methods here related to JavaScript. And the idea with code coverage is it is a measurement for how...
I don't think any... does everybody see your screen? I'm not sure that your screen is seeing.
Oh yeah, good check. If you guys can see the screen, could you raise your hand? If anyone can see the screen. Looks like a couple people can see the screen. Okay, and yeah, you should see a unit test. So I'm guessing that your let's see, we got a question coming in here. Yeah, it does. It looks like some folks can see the screen, and some cannot. So I don't know if that's a GoToMeeting issue or not, but I'll definitely keep that in mind. Let me. I'll do this. I will stop my screen, and I will start it back up again. And sometimes that'll help. Sorry about that. Okay, Phil, can you see it? Can you see it now?
No, I cannot. But the GoToMeeting does say now viewing Alex's screen.
That's really strange. All right, let me. Yeah, I'm going to check with another staff here. Pat, if you're there, are you able to see my screen by chance?
Amy's here, but I can't see your screen either.
All right. So sorry about that. That's
Pat just
odd.
chatted no.
Okay. Interesting. So I will let me do this then. I will switch to. I'm using two monitors, so I'm guessing that's part of the problem here.
We're probably playing your alternate monitor, which has nothing on it. Actually, just has the introduction. Except in done well.
All right, I'm going to try this again here. So I just did a screen share, so hopefully you'll see just my I don't know, just a blue screen here. And how about?
There you go. We can see that now.
I can see it now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great. Okay. Cool. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. It looks like. Okay. Great. Looks like a lot of you are able to see it now. So. Good. So, and just to show, here is the uncanny sort of resemblance of our product logo and XBOSoft's logo as well that I was showing. So, then that's the other two slides that we were looking at earlier as well. So, anyway, so to the topic of this automated unit testing. So, you know, this is primarily a fundamental of test-driven development, and this idea of code coverage is something that a lot of folks in TDD will use as a metric to say and demonstrate how well their code, basically what percentage of unit test code covers the code in their libraries and their applications and their classes. And one topic that I hear come up a lot is this idea of 100% code coverage. And Phil, is this something that you hear much, or I mean, what's your take on this idea of trying to achieve a near 100% code coverage?
Well, for the unit testing, a lot of our clients may have that as a goal, but as far as real attainability, I would say that most of our clients probably reach around 75%.
So there's still, and now is that something that's used, is code coverage for you guys actually used when you set those goals? Is that used as a goal to higher, the better code coverage, the better the code is, or how do you use code coverage as a metric?
Well, I mean, code coverage is one metric that can be used that can lead to higher quality code. So that the code has been tested or covered, so to speak, does not necessarily mean that it's good quality code. So you can have 100% code coverage and code that still does the wrong thing, but be syntactically correct. So code coverage is just one metric that could be used to predict quality, but it's not the only thing. Other things like code complexity, for instance, there are a lot of tools that work on that. They could also be used to predict software quality.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And Phil, just as an aside, we're getting a lot of comments and questions about your audio. So I don't know if you're able.
Let me work on that.
Okay, yeah, and I think it's largely because of the distance from the. I'm guessing you're not using a headset or not because of your travel schedule or something. So in any case, yeah, and I think what Phil was saying though is that 100% code coverage, it's a metric to determine the how tested the code is, and in and of itself, that's really all that code coverage is about. It's just a metric to do that, and I think fundamentally an idea that I've found, especially over the years, to be true with lots of different industries and domains, is that the idea of just because you have high quality code, if that's something that you measure with code coverage, if it's something you measure with another metric, just because it's really good code does not mean that it's good software at all. What goes into making good software is a whole lot more than code. And when we take a step back and look at where unit testing and especially code coverage fits in, it's just a small portion of it's a small portion of the type of integration testing. And there's a lot of different bits and pieces and just a lot of different terminologies that we can use as part of this phase of testing. But the idea is that there are lots of pieces to this, and the idea of unit testing and code coverage is just a small picture, a small piece of the integration testing picture. On top of that, when we compare integration to all of the different testing types and testing levels, it is just one of the many different types of testing that we do as part of the software QA and testing process. And even in and of itself, testing is just a relatively small piece of all of software development. So if I think as you said, Phil, if any piece is bad, let's say you write code that goes against pull requirements or something like that, you're just going to end up with bad software. So testing is an important part of software, but so are all of these other pieces to it. So coming up with a good testing strategy isn't necessarily about coming up with, a perfect test or 100% testing in a particular area. It's about coming up with a smart testing strategy and how that fits into that. So I guess a question that comes up a lot, and Phil, it'd be great to get your input if your audio is improved, is how much testing is enough, especially when we look at it compared to the rest of all these other processes and aspects of software development.
Mm-hmm. Well, how much testing, can you hear me now? Is this better, Alex?
Oh, tremendously better, yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, how much testing is enough is really depending on the kinds of things that you do further upstream in the development cycle. So if all you're depending on is testing to ensure QA in your software, if testing is the only QA activity in your software, then there's never enough testing. If, however, you're doing a lot of work up front in requirements analysis and examining the requirements to make sure that those are correct, as well as examining your test cases to make sure that those are correct as well, then the testing can be reduced quite a bit. So how much testing is enough? It really depends on the amount of risk that you're willing to take, as well as the things that you've done in the beginning of the development cycle that are related to quality, but not necessarily direct coding activities.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And one thing I've always thought about and mentioned is that when it comes to testing, there is an idea of too much testing, and I think it's important to note that no matter how much you test, you're never going to be able to get to 100%, because you said that what testing is about the reduction of risk, and you can never bring that risk down to the risk reduction down to 0%. There's always a small possibility that something could go wrong.
Yeah, it's really all about the law of diminishing returns, right? I mean, just a normal law of economics.
Yeah, and this is something that I think as a software developer and talking with other folks in the industry, they tend to have challenges with not necessarily this idea, but wanting to have, a lot of things in software, it's either there's definitive answers, there's certain solutions to problems, but when it comes to QA and testing, it's always about finding that risk. And is that primarily? I mean, how do you strike that good balance of not 100 and not 0?
Well, a lot of times, if you work over time from release to release, you can begin to predict the quality of the software based on the activities that you performed and the metrics that you've developed up front. So predicting the defect leakage can be done by examining the activities that you did beforehand. We did X, Y, and Z, and this resulted in a defect leakage of 1%. And if we add a little bit up front, maybe you get to 0.7%, and you can start to be able to see and predict what happens if you do other things.
So one thing that I always, and I think I use this I use this screenshot or this old picture a lot of times in different in different presentations and different webinars. But I'm curious, Phil, if you're familiar with what process is going on in this picture. It's to describe it. There's two key punch entry folks who are handing over a coding sheet from one to the other. Have you seen this process before?
No, I haven't seen this process myself, other than to actually enter in punch code cards, hands-on myself. I haven't seen other people do it though.
Yeah, same here. It's a relic of history for me. I have a few punch cards just as fun artifacts. But what to me is really fascinating is what process is being represented by this photograph here. So you've got two key punch entry folks who will take the same sheet of paper that has the same lines of code that need to be translated into punch cards, and they're going to enter the exact same code sheet into two separate decks of punch cards, which in theory are going to be identical. They're going to then run those punch cards through the IBM 56 verification machine, and what that's going to do is just tell them if a single punch card is incorrect. I think that's interesting because this is something that the industry at the time, and this had to have been the 60s, or so. This is a risk that they felt was worth mitigating. The cost of just not only the punch card verifier, but having two people enter that same data was something that businesses felt was worthwhile. Today, the idea of having someone, save your code, we rely on backups, we rely on a lot of things. So this notion, I think, shows how, that risk management and risk projection for when it comes to software is more there's a lot of things that go into it. You know, and a lot of it depends on the systems that you're developing as well. So I think today, you know, the way that I've looked at it, and this is generally a negative sounding phrase, but what I tend to say for testing, or how I've always felt it, is that testing should be good enough. And by that, I don't necessarily mean, you know, that you should deliver a mediocre product or, you know, something inadequate, but you should deliver something that the customer, the audience, the intended users of the software will find acceptable for risk and for the code for the application that they're going to be using. How do you balance? I mean, how have you found that good enough balance with clients? Because you can always do, you know, you can always add another 9, right, to your testing. You can always increase and reduce the risk even further.
Well, you know, the good enough bar has gone down over time because of the pressure in releasing software to market and the features that come with that and the demands of people. So good enough now means that usually there are no priority 1 and priority 2 bugs in the release. So that's kind of the definition, in a way, of a layman's definition of good enough.
And that's interesting because you said priority 1 and priority 2. You know, in every organization that I've worked in and had experience with, there's no standardization of these priorities that I've seen. When you say priority 1 or priority 2, do you mean that in a general sense, or is there some source that we can look to that talks about these different priorities? That's a sort of standardization of these.
Yeah, well, you know, these different types of priorities vary from organization to organization, as you said. But back in the 70s and in the late 70s, they were fairly well defined by IBM, where they had the 5 different priorities and actually outlined what those things meant. So, but those you know, things have drifted over time, you know, based on the organization.
Is that something that you'd say? You know, I mean, we have our own priorities. Generally, they happen to be whatever the default priorities were in our issue tracking system software. We use Jira, so, you know, it's, you know, critical but high.
Right.
How important is that in, you know, that of course tells you the priority of a particular defect, but how important is defining the priority of issues when it comes to quality?
Geez, I mean, it's incredibly important. We have limited resources, so we cannot do everything. And so, you know, when it comes down to crunch time, we always work on the highest priority things. You know, it's another way of quantifying and qualifying, determining the quality of the testing process is, you know, the elimination of different types of priority defects.
Okay, so you can look at how many new defects come in or how many defects are discovered in testing cycles, and by using metrics and analysis after the fact, determine which processes are going to be more effective at mitigating these different priority or these different defects.
Right.
Okay. Now, at what point does it make sense for a team to start exploring, you know, a lot of the process improvement that I see going on is everyone, you know, a lot of people are looking at how can we become more agile? How can we become, you know, as you were saying, how can we release software faster? At what point does, you know, how do you balance that, you know, by saying let's step back and actually, you know, start adding more process or adding more process metrics? How do you balance that with being able to deliver software faster?
Geez, I mean that's the big question of agile, right? Delivering fast and managing the quality, and a lot of organizations today are grappling with that and don't really know where to fit QA into an agile process. And so what they end up doing a lot of times is, you know, agile is supposed to have no QA sprint, and then if you have no QA at the end, which integrates it all together, then you end up producing lousy software. On the other hand, if you have this QA at the end, then you have the time constraints of releasing the software. So, it's a balance in being able to, like I said before, based on your activities in the beginning and your planning and requirements and the types of testing that you have early in the cycle, those can be used to predict really how much testing is needed pre-release and how many bugs will be or how many defects will be in the software after the fact.
What advice would you give for companies who are, as they're adapting Agile, or maybe they're already Agile and are at a point where they're comfortable with their release cycle? They're saying, okay, we've successfully gone from 6 months to 2 weeks, 2-week sprints of delivery. What would you suggest for them to start saying, but maybe we can build better software? How can we, where's a good starting point?
Well, first of all, I haven't really come across that many organizations that have gone from 6 months to 2 weeks. That definitely would be a rare find.
I'd agree.
Yeah. I think, though, that doing continuous builds and as a way to integrate quality into the entire build process would probably be the first place I'd start in terms of getting quality into the beginning of the cycle.
So sort of earlier, well, yeah, I mean, and that's the earlier you find a problem, the cheaper it's going to be to fix.
Yeah, I mean, I have worked with organizations before where, if you check in code, as soon as you check in code, it's tested right there, and if there's a defect in the code, it just gets bounced back out. So that's a way to make sure that in the end there's nothing in there that will have defects in it.
Yeah, I think that's the idea of gated check-ins, where you're,
right.
You have a gated check-in process, and I think, as a tech person, I think a lot of developers really love finding themselves going down that path of, all right, well, we can set up this process, we can set up rollbacks, we can set up this, and I think as organizationally, that's the further you go down that path, I mean, it's a great place to start, but, I always go back to, sort of this weakest link idea, that if you, let's say you have this really impressive gated check-in system where it'll run a build, it'll, do all this other stuff. I think ultimately, though, if you're building the wrong software for the end user, it doesn't matter how good the code is. How do you balance other phases in the test cycle with that? So start with how do you know, as an example, when your continuous integration, continuous build strategy is enough, and it's time to start looking at other aspects of the quality process?
Well, I think actually probably the most important part of the quality is looking at quality from the viewpoint of the end user. And, a lot of companies are working hard on this in terms of measuring end user quality, measuring customer satisfaction, customer experience, and based on that, you can kind of pinpoint different areas, and actually even measuring technical support calls, help desk calls, those kinds of things that you get is valuable information that you can use to adapt your development process based on the types of complaints that are coming in.
Now, one thing that we've fairly, we've made this a big priority in our version 4 product cycle here, but we're trying to listen very carefully to, not necessarily complaints. I mean, obviously, we've always wanted to fix bugs, but what we try to listen to are, when people do have questions, whether it's technical support or issues, we don't, we almost look at that as a defect. If somebody can't immediately find how to do something and has to post a question on the forums or ask us or something, we look at that as a measurement for how we're building the software. And this is a topic that obviously moves into user experience, but for us that was a pretty big shift because traditionally you'd get software, then you'd go to a training class, you'd learn how to use it. It doesn't seem like that's the case for a lot of applications anymore.
Well, that's the thing that a lot of people forget, in that our world of instant gratification goes beyond, goes into software, actually. We expect to be able to learn and use a piece of software immediately, and there is no training. So the learnability and the usability of the software is actually a part of the quality of the software that can't really be determined by code coverage, like we said before.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a part where you need to have a good feedback mechanism, and not necessarily, I would say look for problems, but consider problems, not being able to use the software or constantly entering the wrong piece of data. Maybe your user isn't the problem. Maybe the problem is the UI. That to me is I think where we're seeing an evolution in software right now. It's starting, but is that something that you're seeing larger organizations start paying attention to?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that gets back to what I was talking about in terms of being able to examine your support tickets, your technical support, and your help desk tickets. If you have a lot of customers or clients calling in and complaining about a certain piece or having messing up in a certain area, not because there's a defect in the software, but because they don't know how to quite use it quite right, and they keep making mistakes, then it's not the software, it's not the client's problem, it's the software's problem. And there may be no real obvious defects there, but the software is just not working, right? So that's a defect in itself.
Yeah, and I think that's part of this shift. As we're moving towards faster and faster delivery, creating a good user experience is one of those things that it seems easy to forget about doing. And just to quickly implement the functional requirements and do that. So I think that's for a lot of folks, that's something that we as software developers, regardless of our part, whether we're on the QA side, management, this notion of not just making software that meets requirements, but that delivers a user experience is good. I suppose library developers don't really need to worry about that as much, but at some point a user has to be interacting with the software, I would imagine.
Right.
So, one thing I did, so when I look at testing, and I like to try to categorize things, and I found that we can break testing down into some different types, and I wanted to run these by you and of course the audience to get their impression and ideas for how this is compatible with their process or how it works. But whenever I've looked at testing, I've always seen there being 5 distinct types of testing that we can perform on software. Integration testing is the one that we talked about a lot earlier, but the way I've described it is integration testing includes everything from unit tests to a very quick smoke test. Essentially, it's a test to make sure that the software works. Just period. That it'll turn on, that it'll integrate, that everything just works out of the box. Functional testing takes a look at the requirements and basically says, does the software meet the requirements? Is the software functional as per the spec? Acceptance testing is where the users come in, but it's basically asking, do the requirements as they're implemented by the software meet the actual business need? The 4th type, non-functional testing. This is an area, this is sort of the catch-all category, almost the catch-all. It could be things like, does this meet a security requirement? I think you could put user acceptance testing in here. I'm sorry, user experience testing could be a non-functional requirement. That's something difficult to capture in a in a specific requirement. And lastly, staging testing, where staging is something that and I'm sorry, I did not have the slides on, but staging is the type of testing where you are making sure that the software can actually be deployed. So this is, that in staging testing, that could be doing something like taking a production backup of your database and running database change scripts against it to make sure that the database changes apply appropriately. If you're deploying to unique hardware, keeping a pretty close hardware match, things like that. In your experience, Phil, how do you focus on these different types of questions? These different types of testing, and when you see all these in a line, how do you work to balance these test types?
That's a tough question here. Well, I think that mostly that we tend to focus on things that we understand better. And so I think a lot of companies that develop software tend to focus a lot on the functional testing that is in requirements, and as well as the integration testing, which you can, integration basically after you put all the pieces together, does it work the way you want it to? And there seems to be, and staging is also fairly straightforward. You put it in different environments and different putting the pieces together in different places and see if that works. And I think the place that really needs more emphasis is on those two remaining areas that are more difficult to define. And you mentioned that non-functional is difficult to define sometimes, as well as acceptance. A lot of our clients have a lot of difficulty in determining what acceptance criteria are. And so I would say that those two areas are really black holes in terms of trying to figure out what those things are. Yet they're very, very important, and a lot of times they could just cause something not to be releasable, or be released and then have a big tragedy at the end where it just doesn't work with the way the customer wants it to. So I think working on defining acceptance criteria and the non-functional testing areas and defining those criteria, for instance, in performance and in usability and in learnability. I know that they're difficult to define, but they can be. For instance, learnability, you could set a criteria, for instance, that a user has to be able to complete a task for the first time, a brand new user, within 15 seconds. Or perhaps that they use it the second time, they should be able to decrease their time to complete the task by 30%, indicating that they're learning very quickly. So there are ways to define these kind of things, and I think that's where the emphasis should go.
Well, that's an interesting metric. I mean, that's something I would not have thought of for how we could measure, again, that learnability, discoverability, usability. A lot of people develop business applications, in-house software. How could you test something like that? Or, let's say, I think if you're Google, if you have just ridiculous amounts of users, these are easy, but on a smaller scale, how do you begin to test something like that, like learnability?
Well, you could have controlled experiments, or you could simply use logs. We did some tests. You used Jira. We did some tests with Jira where we were able to use the Jira logs, and based on the configuration of screens, we could track which kind of screens were easier for users to get through and which ones were not. So, you can set up your own little experiment on a homegrown basis and be able to figure things out without too much trouble.
That's a really good idea. So yeah, I guess something as simple as that, the logs page, right? Will just looking at logs.
It'll tell you how long it takes a user to do something.
Very, very good idea. So one I think big change that's happening. So user experience is another thing that is starting to define these non-functional requirements. Finding new ways for acceptance, especially when your users aren't, I mean, in traditional, the traditional, as a corporate software, it's easy to get acceptance, but when you have tens of thousands of users on a web app, that acceptance portion is hard. And I think these are all things that as software evolves, as the way we use software evolves, these are things that just we need to become more and more adept at changing. I think another thing, though, that is really changing testing and the way that we look at that sort of good enough metric is this idea of accelerating the software delivery process. And software, the whole point of it is to, of course, have it be able to change frequently and adapt to business needs as frequent as possible, or create new business opportunities when someone decides that that's needed. And this is the area, obviously, that I have a lot of experience in on the automation and accelerating the software delivery cycle. I thought what we could do is take a quick look here at how someone would use our software tool, Buildmaster. Now, Buildmaster is not a testing tool by any means, but it is something that helps with the with accelerating the software development lifecycle. And I think giving a quick demonstration here of how Buildmaster is used to quickly deliver software from source control to testing, give some context to how we how we can improve and optimize our testing as it relates to continuous delivery or a more DevOps workflow, or however we want to describe it. So let me switch on over real quick to Buildmaster here, and I'll show just a quick run-through of what Buildmaster does and how it can really, I know for us and for some of our users, it's really changed the way that they've done and thought about testing. So hopefully you can see my screen now, and I've just shifted to a very, very simple line of business application here, just called accounts, and it's meant to represent just the trivial example. And so if we take a revenue, expenses, it's meant to calculate the net profit, but it does so in a very, very optimistic manner. So this is obviously a trivial problem to fix. So to fix it, all I really have to do is go to our source code, and in this case I have the source code hosted on GitHub, and mostly because it's very easy to demo. GitHub has an editor in here to allow you to just create new versions and commit directly from the web. So I'll do that, right? I'll just go to the code file where there was a problem and submit the single character code change here. Now, this is how software has always been, fixed and changed, but having good tooling in place will help accelerate and get these changes out faster. So once I made that change in Buildmaster, what I could have done was, I could have configured this to automatically create builds, but just to give an idea of how the process works, we just go into Buildmaster and create a new build. And what that's going to do is run through all of the steps necessary to get the code from GitHub. Could be any source control system, like I said, built, compiled, running some unit tests on it, packaged into an artifact, and then stopping services, starting services, and effectively installing the application on our service. Something that isn't too hard to do manually, but the fact that we can do it at the click of a button, or we could have even configured, an automatic build to do it on check-in, is something that changes a lot. So in this case, we'll verify that our code change was successful, or that our code change was successfully deployed, and we can see revenue, expenses yields the correct net profit. So to show where, and this is something that if you've seen continuous integration, if you've seen automatic builds, I think none of this is new, right? This is something that I think everyone who's familiar with this workflow has seen. What we do a little bit differently than on Buildmaster is that we represent the software delivery process. Namely, in this particular application, I've configured three different environments here: integration, testing, and production. Obviously, these relate to the types of testing. And for us to go into our next environment and essentially move this build of code forward, it's just a matter of promoting this to our test environment. Before doing that, it's going to complain first. It's going to say, we cannot promote the build because now required approvals are present. I could force this, of course, but it's also defined. So when you look at the process that Buildmaster has set up, you'll see that we have, the one that's missing here is somebody approving that the manual smoke test is passed. Since I'm in the testing group, I can approve this and say, yes, I ran the smoke test, check that off, and approve it. And you can also see that environment here before sending this build off to testing is the unit test. And they, in fact, did. We can see unit test results and can easily promote these to our test. It shows it all the code and it worked. Once we do that, now we can promote this build and send it off to our testing environment, and we could do it at a scheduled time, but it's just as easy to have that happen right away. Now, when we do this, it's going to not rebuild the code. It's just going to basically stop the applications, deploy the packaged version of it, the configuration, and then restart the web server. And like that, we can just go to our testing website and verify that the code behaves as expected. And in this case, it's calculate the net profit fine. And we can further verify that the version 4.1.2 matches the version, the build that we deployed in Buildmaster, release 4.1 build 2. So fundamentally, this is how having an automation tool facilitate this software delivery and QA process can help. Taking things to production is just as easy to do. But it's also going to block us from that promotion as well. In this case, it's going to say that we cannot promote because our issues in our issue tracker are closed. So this is something that's going to be relatively easy to fix as well. It is a requirement that we've integrated with the issue tracker. In this case, just we're again using GitHub because it's really simple to use. But all I have to do to certify this promotion requirement and basically allow this to go to production is sign off that this issue has been fixed, which we tested and did a quick verification on. And now I can promote this to production without having any blocking, without having blocked or needing to force the build. And when we do that, it will just go through and basically run the same type of deployment here. What I think is particularly powerful for us is we've reduced a tremendous amount of risk at a lot of parts in the process. This is a trivial application. It's hard to do any sort of real testing in it, but by having a repeatable, easy-to-follow process that has approvals, has promotion requirements, has things like that, I think that helps everyone on the team be confident that they can move and deliver software quickly, but also gives them some form of process and some sort of balancing act to make sure that they are also they're also delivering good software quickly. In your experience, Phil, how have you seen automation tools like Buildmaster help organizations with software quality?
Well, I was just going to say in the beginning before you started doing the demo that anytime you are able to put together builds more efficiently, that means that you can test more efficiently. So most organizations that have this kind of automated build process are able to push out builds and do testing more frequently rather than waiting to the end. So this is a really good way of, like I said earlier, moving the QA process further upstream.
I think that's something that I hadn't really thought about until, firsthand experiencing it. Of course, we're going to, use our own software and deploy it. But the simple, having these automation tools helped add quality into the process where we didn't have it before. It's simple things that would have otherwise been sort of difficult to test. And it's not necessarily, software quality-wise, but as a quick example, we would find ourselves deploying software too early. Now, I don't mean to our customers, but to our demo environments. So one thing that we added as a process standpoint was to basically just had an approval to say before deploying to our demo environment, somebody has to say, oh, this environment's not in use by anyone. That's something that it sounds like that's something you should do, but it's really reduced the anxiety and fear that people will have when deploying to that environment. We've added a lot of other tests too of similar natures as well that would have been fairly difficult to express in a testing document or an automated test as well.
Mm-hmm. I think the process of doing the build and deploying on a regular basis with a tool like Buildmaster makes it not such a big deal, so that organizations get more comfortable with deploying, and then that makes them better at it.
So we have new releases pretty often. You can. You can just see in our website here. We've right on our release notes. We're releasing January 15th, December 19th, November, right a week before, and we've gotten some interesting feedback on this. So you can basically see our purpose in doing this, by the way, is so that we can ship very, very small releases. And, or I should say, ship releases with smaller changes sooner, because the bigger the release, the more risk there is in change to that. What's interesting, though, is that we've gotten sort of almost polar opposite feedback on this. Some folks have said that they're concerned that we're shipping this many releases of the software. Others have found that to be a positive thing. I think what that is showing is that there's a shift in thinking. 5 years ago, having this frequent of a release cycle for a product company, or I'd say for maybe even any software, would be seen as just showing instability. But as we have software users come to accept Patch Tuesday with Windows, or any updates of apps on our phones or anything like that, I think that's helping change the attitudes in organizations as well. To not only make shipping software faster, more acceptable, but it's a trend that I think people are starting to push towards as well. Have you found that to be the case with folks that you're working with as well, that they're starting to accept that maybe they should release more often?
I would say that's probably the trend of all of our customers, that they want to be able to release more often. And releasing more often means greater satisfaction of their customers and their users, as they're able to roll out more features faster. Not necessarily like before, where you do a one-year release and it has 20 different features and updates in it, but 3 month, 1 month, 2 month type of release cycle, where you can release something to the customer and show them a different and better experience.
Yeah, and it's I know for us especially, it's really hard to maintain and just not have bugs in when we're releasing this often. We just simply don't have the resources to do the super intensive testing that we'd like to. But I think that's part of that. We want to, our bar for good enough is, we want to make sure that the core functionality that, it's not going to completely break, but you might find an odd error if you're doing an edge case a certain way. And I think that's just how we have to think of quality for the way that we build software, and I think that's the shift that we're seeing a lot of our users accept as well, is some of these bugs are, prioritization, and some of these bugs are okay to have.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple questions that have come through, but I thought I'd throw up this slide. If anyone has any other questions, you can follow us on Twitter, go to our website. It's easy to find on that. But if anyone has any questions, we have a few minutes for questions, so feel free to send one of those in. One question that came up was related to Buildmaster. The question was, how does the automation work? Are you basically writing scripts to do all of these things? So real quick, I can show that one of the things we've done in Buildmaster with automation is develop these deployment plans. We tried to make the deployment plans in Buildmaster to be easy to read. They're modeled a lot on those old, like how you might make a Word document or something that gives the steps necessary to do it. You can see here's a very simple one, right? This is run this PowerShell script, deploy this artifact, deploy this config file, and we try to make it easy to build these plans. So when you go to add an action, you are picking, you're picking what you want to do. In this case, if we want to pull something from source control, right? Get latest from source code or from source control, pick your repository, pick the server you want the source code to be grabbed on, and then you can start browsing the repository itself, and you can easily put it on any any remote server that you need to once you've connected all the servers in. So that's how we're trying to make these automation bits relatively easy to do. You can, of course, write scripts if you want to do it, but we found that having simpler deployment plans and just the general idea of simplicity of keeping it as simple as possible when you're deploying things helps significantly reduce deployment risks that happen as well. So hopefully that answered the questions there. So here's a question for you, Phil, that came in. Let me close that. The question is, we are a small company of, there's only 3 developers and 2 QA people. What is important for us to do if we want to improve the quality of our software? Should we still look towards metrics, even though we're such a small team?
Yeah, I think with such a small team, probably you still could look towards metrics, but it would probably be some very, very basic ones. So, just like when you're monitoring your health, maybe the first one that you start with is your weight, right? And you don't get into all these other details on things. But I would look at more in terms of the processes that a small company uses to work together, and look at the bigger picture in terms of, the speed of release and the different items that may go into that and the results that you get. So in the end, you may have some results in terms of looking at the defects that are found by customers, and use that as a way to work backwards. And let's see, so with for this release, we had this many of this type of defects that got into the customers, and then be able to work backwards and see, well, what did we do that got those results? So it's more a question of examining the processes that you're using to work together, especially for a small team.
Good. That makes a lot of sense. Another question on testing that came in. How can I have my team as a manager? How can I have my team more focused on quality? What can I do to get them excited about, quality and testing as opposed to, just writing code?
Geez, that's a tough one. That's the quality that of a product that a company produces is really part of the culture of the company, and I think it's a way of the way that the management really puts that culture forth inside to the employees. So, for instance, if you've got a healthcare product that measures blood pressure, then it's very easy to convey to the employees and the developers and the testers the importance of quality, right? So I think that management has to put their type of spin on it in terms of the goals of their organization and basically the good that their product is doing for their customers.
Oh, Phil, still there? I think you cut out there. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I'm here.
So basically, just I like that it's to show that the quality doesn't just mean running test scripts. It means this is quality. Just be proud of what your work is as part of the company culture. I think that's a good way to put it.
Right.
We have another question that's sort of now flipping it. How do I convince my boss to introduce practices like this? And I know that's something that I've seen a lot, and I get that question a lot, whether it's on automation or testing, but I'll answer and sort of give my advice, and I'd be curious what you think as well, Phil. I found the best way to sell, whether it's automation, whether it's improved testing, anything to your management, to your bosses, is to start with an incremental investment. Don't go in and say, we're going to completely redo everything. Say, let's start small and test the results of that. If we see this all the time with Buildmaster. Start with one application in one environment. Set a proof of concept. If that's okay, they'll move to the next step pretty easily. Is that what you've seen? I don't know how often you see developers advocating for automation or testing, but would you say similar things, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, automation or testing or whatever way that you're going to use to improve your process. We work with a lot of organizations where we go in and examine the quality processes and so forth, and you can end up having a 30-page consulting document, but within that document there's always going to be low-hanging fruit as well as priorities and the impact of doing those things. So I think that it's important to use the 80-20 rule and figure out, okay, how hard is this to implement and what are the benefits going to be? And of course you want to start with the most benefit and the easiest to implement. It's just as any project manager would do in trying to set forth a program that people are going to accept and be able to see the benefit from right away in order to continue the program.
I think that's that makes a lot of sense. So we have time for one last question, and I will pick this here. How does Buildmaster help with testing? Real quick. I mean, there are some unit testing integrations you'll see. Like if we look at this old. We look at this build here, you can see that we have a record of the unit tests that were executed. And so this particular test suite, I believe, was done with, actually I'll double check, it was done with NUnit as well. But we don't have a whole lot of integrations with large testing tools or testing suite tools. What we've found is that that's okay for a lot of our users. We can just rely on sort of this manual, like basically having somebody check off, we don't have, for example, a list of all the test cases that you'd want to run, but what we do have is the ability to have someone check off and say, I ran the appropriate test cases, put their name on it, and assign that. We also have some automation that you could write in. You can automate some of these promotion requirements and say, like that's for example how the issue tracking and unit testing work as well. They just look at they're an automated thing, and they look at test results and things. So you could add those as well. Buildmaster is pretty extensible to add those in. So with that being said, this is all the time that we had today. Actually, we ran a little bit over because of some of the tech difficulties earlier, which I apologize for. But thank you, Phil, for joining me in this discussion on testing. And if anyone has questions, thoughts, comments, we absolutely love to hear them. So just shoot us emails, send us, follow us on Twitter, and let us know.
Okay.
So thanks, Phil. Thank you, everyone. And we will have this posted, this video posted. We'll try to edit out some of the technical glitches, but we'll get this posted pretty soon. Thanks, everyone.